Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Kansas. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. In the spring of 1900, a weary traveler arrived by stagecoach along a dirt lane in rural Kansas, near a township that scarcely appeared on maps. The wind that morning carried a dry, uneasy chill, stirring dust across the fields and the bare wooden fence posts. He paused before a sagging farmhouse, its shutters half-hanging, its paint long lost to weather. No animals stirred, no smoke rose from its chimney. Yet as he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of two figures standing still near the porch, a young man and a woman, unmoving, watching him silently. The traveler said later he felt no malice, only an unbearable sense of wrongness. He left quickly, refusing to pass that road again. When local constables visited weeks later, the property appeared abandoned, but neighbors reported strange lights in the windows after midnight, faint music, and the smell of oil lamps. In one statement, an old farmhand named Patrick Coyle said he saw movement upstairs, though no soul lived there. Townsfolk whispered of an old curse linking the land to older horrors, the infamous Bloody Benders, whose farmhouse murders decades earlier still haunted Kansas lore. The same pattern, some said, a quiet house, strange visitors, and sudden disappearances. County records from the clerk's office show the land changed hands often after 1880. The last known owners were a poor farming couple, Thomas and Elise Warren, listed in 1897 tax rolls, then struck off by 1899. Nothing in census data explains why. Some locals claim the Warrens had a son and daughter, but no record confirms it. What remains are letters written, each faded ink, hinting at hardship, debt, and isolation. "Winter takes everything," one fragment reads. "We hear voices through the boards." By late summer of 1900, the farmhouse had become a point of fear in the county. Travelers on the old wagon trail reported seeing candlelight through the windows at hours past midnight. A peddler named Louis Brent claimed he heard a woman humming from inside, but found the door bolted and the curtains drawn. When he returned the next day, the place looked deserted, dust thick on the steps, prints gone from the path. In his affidavit to the sheriff's office, he wrote, "It was as though the house itself had exhaled something, then fell still again." Neighbors described a young man and woman about 25 years old who appeared around harvest time, repairing the fences and tending to the soil. They wore poor, patched clothing, their faces lean from hunger. No one saw them purchase supplies, yet smoke rose occasionally from their chimney. One woman from town, Clara Oates, said she left bread and milk near the fence, but by morning the food had vanished without a trace. When she returned a week later, she found a single button placed neatly on the fence post, as if in thanks. Constable Harrow began keeping a small log of these accounts, noting that 2 persons of uncertain residence are known to inhabit the property. He visited in early October. The farmhouse stood silent under gray sky, the fields dead, soil cracked. Inside, he found the remains of a meal, cold beans, bread crusts, a tin mug with water. But upstairs, the air was thick and stale, as though someone had been standing there moments before. He felt the sensation of being observed from behind, though the room was empty. On the floor near the window lay a child's wooden toy horse, its head missing. When he turned to leave, Harrow noticed faint footprints in dust leading to the window, then stopping abruptly at the sill. That winter, the sheriff's office received word that a traveler named Simon Heller had disappeared. A raid on his route through the county. His cart was later discovered overturned 2 miles east of the Warren place. In his last telegram, he mentioned delivering goods to a poor couple near the old Homestead road. The letter was dated November 2nd, 1900, the last anyone heard of him. Local papers made only a passing note, calling it another unexplained vanishing on the back roads of Kansas, drawing comparisons again to the old Bloody Benders, whose farmhouse crime still stood as a grim warning to travelers trusting the wrong door. By early 1901, the unease had grown so deep that the Township Council ordered Constable Harrow and his deputy, James Carver, to conduct a formal search of the Warren property. The night before they went, Carver noted in his field journal that, "The people here speak of the house as if it breathes." When the two men arrived before dawn, mist clung low over the fields. The farmhouse looked smaller than before, its roof buckled inward, glass missing from the upper windows. Harrow called out. No answer came, but the faint creak of floorboards echoed inside. They stepped in with lanterns raised. The downstairs rooms were cluttered. Old trunks, broken dishes, animal bones scattered near the hearth. In the parlor, an oil lamp still burned faintly, its flame nearly starved of air. Upstairs they found a room with two narrow beds, each covered in coarse gray blankets. Between them sat a small chest containing scraps of paper, ledger pages, prayer cards, a lock of hair tied in string. One scrap of writing caught Harrow's attention. It read, "She watches from above. We dare not look too long." He pocketed the paper and turned toward the stair. That's when both men heard it, a soft shifting noise from overhead, like someone stepping across boards in the attic. They froze. Harrow later testified that a pale light flickered once through the ceiling cracks, then vanished. When they climbed to investigate, they found no intruder, only a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. In its reflection, Carver swore he saw a figure at the upper window, a woman's outline staring outward toward the fields. But when he spun around, there was no one there. The officers sealed the house for investigation. 3 days later, when Harrow returned with a clerk to catalog the evidence, the paper scrap was gone from his desk drawer. The clerk swore he never saw it. The attic mirror, too, had disappeared. By spying, ring, the property once again stood empty. Locals resumed calling it cursed ground. Even the children walking to school took long detours to avoid it. Rumors spread that the young man and woman, the poor couple seen by neighbors, had been brother and sister, not husband and wife, and that their bond hid something unnatural, something whispered about but never spoken aloud in daylight. By midsummer of 1901, the Kansas State Marshal's office assigned investigator Eliza Monroe to examine the file. She was methodical, known for her calm precision and unwillingness to chase ghost stories. Her notes show she arrived at the property on July 18th. The journal entry reads, "House silent, air heavy with mold and damp soil. No movement, yet sense of presence persists." She brought with her a local surveyor to map the land. Beneath the back porch, they found a section of disturbed soil covered by old planks. The boards lifted easily, revealing a shallow trench. Inside were fragments of cloth, a brass ring, and a small, rusted locket. Monroe noted that the initials E.W. were faintly etched inside. She sent it to the county clerk for reference. It was never recorded again. During her time in town, Monroe interviewed residents, gathering a composite of the families said to live there. Descriptions matched those collected earlier. A man and woman in their mid-20s, both gaunt and poor, always together, never speaking to anyone beyond a nod. No one recalled seeing them buy food or fuel. The grocer in town swore they survived on what the earth wouldn't give. Several residents compared their appearance to churchyard shadows, pale and withdrawn. In one conversation preserved in a later transcript, Monroe asked about their eyes, and a witness replied, "Nothing strange, just like they'd seen more than they should." Monroe also made note of the region's obsession with the Bloody Benders case decades earlier, observing how such tales shape perception. "The plains remember," she wrote. "They bury truth in myth." Her notes suggest she considered the Bender legend less as folklore and more as a psychological scar left on Kansas communities that once feared isolation as much as evil itself. She ended her field log that week with a chilling line. Upstairs, the window remin. "Ain's open, though. The latch is broken. Something wants to see." After her departure, the case file stagnated. Funding for further investigation lapsed. Within months, the farmhouse was leased again, this time to a transient worker named Orrin Dale, who stayed only 2 nights. He left a handwritten complaint with the sheriff, claiming he woke to footsteps above the ceiling and found prints of bare feet on the inside of his window pane the following morning. No one took his account seriously, but the sheriff quietly placed the letter inside the Warren file, marking it in red pencil. Unresolved. Winter of 1902 brought snow early and heavy across that part of Kansas. The farmhouse sagged further beneath the weight, windows crusted in frost, its yard covered in brittle grass. A postal rider, Jonas Kerr, traveling through in late January, reported smoke rising faintly from the chimney. Assuming squatters, he approached and knocked. He later stated under oath that the door opened just enough for him to glimpse a young woman's face in the dark, expression blank, eyes ordinary, yet somehow distant. She said only, "No letters today," and closed the door. When Kerr reported this encounter, the sheriff dispatched 2 deputies the following morning. The house was empty, its hearth cold, snow undisturbed around the entryway. Kerr's testimony added a new layer to the confusion, proof that someone still occupied the place after every prior search. Monroe, revisiting her notes, sent a letter to the state office urging a renewed inspection. She cited similarities with rural cases from the 1870s, specifically referencing the Bloody Benders, suggesting how forgotten homesteads might conceal ongoing crimes. Her request was denied for lack of evidence. In March, a farmhand named Henry Tull disappeared while cutting across the property. He had been delivering feed to a neighboring farm. His horse returned without him, reins dragging through the mud. A few days later, the animal was found near the Warren fields again, tethered to a fence post as if placed deliberately. Search teams combed the area but found nothing. They noted impressions in the snow, one set of small bare feet and another heavier pair, leading from the road toward the farmhouse and stopping abruptly at its porch. Town gossip reached fever pitch. Some said the poor sibling still lived inside, taking travelers who wandered too near. Others whispered they had died years ago but remained somehow visible, seen by those who passed at dusk. The town preacher warned against feeding fear with memory, yet even he refused to ride that road after nightfall. The property became known locally as the House That Waits. No one could agree whether the sightings were of living people or ghosts. Records show several attempts to purchase the land failed. One investor from Topeka withdrew his offer after visiting in person, noting in a letter, "There is a smell of dampness and sorrow that never leaves the air." Even into spring, no birds nested on the property. Locals swore the wind sounded different there, as if the house itself sighed when approached. By late summer of 1902, an investigative reporter from Wichita named Clarence Holt arrived, hoping to publish a feature on rural hauntings and lingering crimes of the plains. He spent 2 nights near the Warren homestead, camping under a grove of dead trees less than a quarter-mile away. In his surviving notes, later recovered from a trunk after his death, Holt wrote that he saw movement at the farmhouse around midnight, a dim lantern light in the upper window, and the silhouette of a man and woman standing side by side inside the glass. He described their posture as stiff, their faces pale, but their eyes, he noted specifically, were normal, as if caught in thought, not malice. When he called out, the lantern extinguished. The next morning he found footprints circling his tent. He returned to town shaken, his article never published. The sheriff's department received his written statement but dismissed it as fevered imagination, yet added it to the growing file. Monroe, still following the case from a distance, referred to Holt's account in her correspondence, observing how every generation finds its ghosts and calls them by old names. She cited the Benders once again, remarking that Kansas seemed destined to carry the weight of vanished souls. By autumn, the farmhouse appeared again in local rumor. A group of hunters reported the sound of hammering echoing across the fields at dusk. When they investigated, they found the front door half open and the upstairs window unlatched. Inside, a ladder rested beneath the attic hatch. One man climbed up and found 2 chairs positioned side by side facing the window. Dust thick except for two clean oval marks on the seat cushions, as if recently occupied. In the corner lay a bundle of clothes, plain garments, cheap fabric, smelling faintly of earth and kerosene. There were no human remains, no blood, only the faint sound of dripping water from somewhere unseen. The hunters sealed the hatch and left in silence. Their report reached the sheriff, but was never entered into the formal log. One of the men, years later, told his grandson that he felt eyes on him for weeks after that night. They weren't angry, he said, just waiting. By the turn of 1903, the farmhouse was a subject of dread beyond its county lines. Locals from neighboring towns spoke of the two who never left, describing a man and woman, poor and expressionless, standing behind glass, neither alive nor entirely gone. In the first weeks of 1903, the county marshal authorized one last official search of the Warren farmhouse. Deputy James Carver led the team. His field report, still surviving in a brittle copy at the state archives, describes entering at dusk under heavy clouds, the air inside like old paper and ash. The ground floor was nearly bare now, furniture removed or burned. Carver and two men lifted rotted planks in the kitchen, revealing a shallow crawl space beneath. There, they found shards of crockery, a small box of buttons, and two stained ledgers listing names and dates from 1894 to 1901. Several names matched persons reported missing in surrounding counties, though no link could be proved. Carver sealed the box for evidence. By morning, the box and its contents were gone from the sheriff's office without record of removal. Upstairs, Carver noticed the upper window again open despite being nailed shut during a prior search. Dust coated the floor except for two distinct footprints, bare, narrow, side by side, ending at the sill. He wrote that a low shudder ran through the walls, though no breeze entered. Looking out, he saw the field stretching gray and empty. In the reflection of the glass, he thought he glimpsed a figure in the opposite window across the hall, a shadow of a woman turning away. But when he crossed to it, the room was empty. The attic above had been cleared, no chairs, no mirror, nothing but rat droppings and a few boards. Carver closed his report with a stark line. It watches from above. We never see its face. Town gossip at once connected this to the old Bloody Benders, whose own crimes involved concealed spaces under a farmhouse and missing travelers. The parallels stuck in newspapers, even though no evidence linked the two. An editorial in a Topeka paper warned travelers to avoid the Warren Road after dusk, and to mind the upper windows of empty home. Despite the fear, no arrests were made. The man and woman described by witnesses never appeared again in any census or church record. Some said they moved on, others that they were never living at all. Yet a few swore that in late spring of 1903 they saw two figures, thin and pale, walking the fields at dawn, carrying a lantern between them, heading toward the house that everyone else had long since abandoned. Through the remainder of 1903, the property decayed faster than nature could explain. Roof beams split, boards fell in straight lines as though pried apart. When state investigator Eliza Monroe returned briefly that autumn, she found the ground around the farmhouse uneven, as if it had been recently dug and filled again. In her notebook she wrote, "Someone revisits the site. The soil does not rest." She gathered remnants from the cellar, rusted nails, a broken frame, and a piece of porcelain from what might have been a child's doll. In the corner of one photograph taken that day, the faint outline of a person is visible in the upper window, though Monroe claimed she was alone. She marked the image simply, "Artifact uncertain." A local physician, Dr. Nathan Phelps, accompanied her on that visit and later gave a short statement to the Wichita Journal. He described the house as quiet but listening, claiming that while examining the cellar, he heard soft movement above, a rhythm like two steps and a pause. When he went upstairs, he found nothing but a draft pulling through the open window. He urged Monroe to leave, but she insisted on documenting every detail. Her report ends abruptly with the line, "The silence feels aware." After that visit, Monroe's correspondence dwindled. She was reassigned to another district and never mentioned the Warrens again in writing. Yet a colleague later noted she became withdrawn, avoiding all cases involving rural homesteads. Among her personal papers found after her death in 1921 was a folded note reading, "The window never truly closed." By 1904, the Warren farmhouse was officially condemned. Local children dared each other to approach its porch, claiming to hear whispering just beyond the door. A passing minister recorded that the structure seemed to breathe with the wind. No one bought the land. Even squatters refused to stay after day. R.K., one of the last surveyors to map the property, mentioned hearing laughter, light, human, but wrong, coming from the upper floor while he stood in daylight. He quit his post the following week. The county let the house rot, vines climbing its sides, the road fading into dirt. Only the stories remained, shared in quiet voices around the taverns when storms rolled in, of a man and woman whose eyes were ordinary, whose presence felt too still, and of something unseen that kept watch from above. In the years that followed, the story of the Warrens became part of Kansas folklore, told in fragments that changed with each generation. Some said the couple were impoverished wanderers who took shelter in the old house and starved during the winter of 1900, their bodies never found. Others swore they were not the Warrens at all, but siblings of another family who once lived near the site, returning years later for reasons no one understood. Every version kept one detail consistent: the watcher in the upper window. Farmers riding home at dusk said they'd glimpse a dim shape behind the glass, neither moving nor fading, even as seasons shifted and the structure fell apart. In 1907, a local historian named George Ellison attempted to write a factual account using county records. He traced missing persons cases from the area and found at least 6 names from 1890 to 1902 that were never resolved. In his preface, he compared the mystery to that of the Bloody Benders, noting how the earlier crime had left a stain of dread across the prairie that no passing year can wash away. His book was never published. The manuscript vanished from the printer's office before release. Decades later, only a few pages resurfaced in a private collection, pages describing a pair bound by blood and secret sin. No official explanation ever satisfied the public. One retired deputy, long after his service, recalled that bones were once found near the well, but quietly reburied at the churchyard to avoid panic. Another insisted the bones were animal, not human. Either way, the rumor stuck, and the land was deemed cursed. By 1910, the house had partially collapsed, leaving only the stone base and the upper frame, where the window still hung like an open wound against the prairie sky. Travelers still wrote to newspapers claiming uneasy sensations when passing it, saying the air grew colder, the sillows, ents too deep. Some accounts even claimed to see 2 faint figures near the porch, a man and a woman, both young, their clothes shabby, eyes solemn, as if waiting for someone who never came. By 1915, the Warren property had nearly disappeared beneath overgrowth, yet the name endured in small talk across the county. A few miles away, a new rail line was being laid, and crews camping nearby reported distant lights at the old homestead. One worker, a man named Alfred Wicks, told his foreman that he saw 2 people standing in the doorway, clear as day, though he knew the house had no door left to stand in. He quit the site the next morning without collecting pay. The foreman noted it in his daily ledger, later donating the book to the county museum where the entry still exists. In town, the older residents treated the story as a warning for newcomers. Don't stay on that road after dusk, or you'll hear them breathing. By then, the case had faded from official memory, but Eliza Monroe's field notes resurfaced briefly when a state archivist compiled a study on unsolved rural crimes. Her mention of the Bloody Benders was highlighted as an early attempt to link folklore with criminal investigation. Historians noted that both cases shared a chilling domesticity, ordinary homes masking extraordinary evil, but differed in proof. The Benders left bodies, the Warrens left absence. The archivist concluded, "One gave us corpses, the other silence." Through the 1920s, what remained of the farmhouse became a landmark for trespassers and thrill-seekers. College students from Wichita visited during summer nights, carving initials into the surviving timbers. A few claimed they heard movement above them, slow and deliberate, though they found no staircase still intact. In 1924, a photographer from Kansas City attempted to capture what he called the faintest human outline in the upper window. The developed plate showed nothing clear, yet when overexposed, two faint silhouettes appeared side by side, standing close as if guarding the room. He dismissed it as light distortion, but refused to revisit. The photograph was later lost in a flood. Locals took it as further proof that whatever watched from that window had not faded with the years. The Homestead's legend persisted, a place where time itself seemed reluctant to pass, where the poor siblings who once lived and vanished had somehow stayed behind to finish what life denied them. By 1930, the county listed the land as uninhabitable, yet survey maps continued to mark the outline of the old Warren structure. Travelers still mentioned unease when passing it. A farmer named Leonard Briggs wrote in his journal that his horse refused to go near the road, rearing violently until he turned back. Briggs described hearing a faint tapping from glass, though no windows remained. That same year, a group of Depression-era drifters took shelter in the ruin during a storm. Only one survived the night. His name was Clyde Mercer, and his later account to the sheriff read like delirium. He claimed the house, filled with whispering as the wind grew, that he saw a man and a woman standing by the old hearth, their faces plain and tired, like they'd been poor too long. He said they watched him quietly, then turned toward the stairs that had long since collapsed, and vanished upward. The sheriff dismissed him as unstable, but townsfolk remembered the name. They started calling the house Mercer's Madness. The following winter, a fire swept through the surrounding fields, burning several outbuildings nearby, but leaving the farmhouse untouched. Witnesses swore the flames curved away, as if the air around it bent. A reporter from Topeka visited afterward, writing a short piece titled "The House That Wouldn't Burn." In it, he compared the story to the Bloody Benders, remarking how Kansas seemed cursed with homes that held on to darkness. The article was short-lived, printed once and buried among local news, but its phrasing stuck. Even today, collectors of true crime ephemera refer to that clipping as the last public record before the house's final collapse. By the end of that decade, the roof caved entirely, yet the foundation remained, and so did the feeling that the land remembered. Locals said that when the wind passed through the field, it carried the sound of two voices, soft, steady, neither crying nor singing, just murmuring back and forth as if continuing a conversation left unfinished for decades. When the 1940s arrived, the Warren land was little more than ruins, splintered wood buried beneath weeds, and the faint trace of a cellar entrance sunk into the earth. During the war years, soldiers on leave sometimes camped nearby, unaware of its story until locals warned them away. One private, Harold Kent, later wrote to a Kansas paper describing how his unit used the field for drills one autumn evening. As dusk fell, a faint light flickered from the sunken remains of the farmhouse. Kent approached, thinking it a lantern, but saw instead a dull glow seeping from the old upper window frame, where no glass remained. He reported hearing faint movement, steps above ground that seemed to circle him. His commanding officer laughed it off, but the soldiers avoided the field afterward. Kent ended his letter with the line, "If that house had a soul, it was never buried." In 1947, a small archaeological team from a state college conducted an unofficial dig, hoping to find remnants of early homesteads. They uncovered pottery fragments, a corroded metal buckle, and what appeared to be a section of wood flooring. In one corner lay a rusted hinge, and two small bones later confirmed to be human, though too degraded to identify. The county coroner suggested they could be from a grave disturbed by erosion. The discovery briefly revived interest in the legend, and once again newspapers drew parallels to the Bloody Benders, two stories divided by decades yet bound by the same geography of dread. Columnists mused about how isolation on the plains bred secrets too heavy for wind to scatter. A week after the dig, one of the students returned to collect equipment and reported finding footprints near the pit. One set small and bare, another larger, both leading to where the upper window would have stood if the house still existed. They vanished at that spot, into nothing but flattened grass. His student left his findings unsubmitted, and the team's records were quietly filed away. The legend settled back into silence, waiting for someone else to listen. By the mid-1950s, the Warren farmhouse existed only in memory and in a few photographs kept by older residents. The land had been sold to a grain company, though construction never began. Workers brought to clear the area quit after 2 days, complaining of strange noises underfoot. Their foreman reported that the ground near the old cellar gave a hollow echo, as though a chamber still lay below. When he broke the surface with a shovel, the soil exhaled a cold draft carrying the smell of rust and damp wood. They covered it again and left without explanation. Local archives note the company abandoned the project permanently. The last person known to research the case that decade was Professor Alan Harker, a historian from Emporia. He specialized in rural folklore and had written essays linking Kansas hauntings to unresolved frontier crimes. Harker visited the site in 1957, writing in his field notebook that he felt a pressure in the air, low and deliberate, like breath drawn before speech. He took soil samples and old nails from the site, planning to trace their origin. 2 weeks later, he suffered a breakdown, claiming that at night he heard someone knocking from above his ceiling, in measured rhythm, 2 steps and a pause. He resigned from his post shortly after and burned most of his research. The surviving fragments found years later contained only one cryptic line. She still waits by the window. In that same year, a storm struck the region, unearthing part of the old foundation. Children playing nearby discovered a rusted picture frame with the faded image of 2 young adults, faces indistinct, clothes plain. Experts could not confirm the photograph's origin, but local consensus was immediate. It showed the Warrens. The picture vanished soon after, supposedly stolen from a museum drawer. What remained was a photocopy so blurred it offered no proof, only suggestion. 2 figures standing before a farmhouse, both looking directly at the camera, both calm, as though aware of something the photographer was not. By the early 1960s, the Warren story had evolved into a cautionary tale told in classrooms and roadside diners. The site itself was little more than a shallow depression in the earth, but those who passed by claimed they still felt watched. Truckers using the back route reported seeing a dim orange glow in the distance that vanished when approached. One driver, interviewed by a local radio station in 1963, described 2 figures standing close together in a field of fog. They looked like any farm couple, he said, only too still. When he turned his headlights toward them, the space was empty. The recording of that interview still exists in the county archives, labeled only Unverified Sightings, Homestead Road. In 1966, a small team of university students returned to document the remaining folklore of the Warren case. They interviewed elderly locals who still remembered names, fragments, and half-true retellings. One woman, nearly 90, swore her mother had known the Warrens as children. They weren't evil, she said, just wrong for this world. The students visited the land and recorded audio of the night wind through the grass. On playback, they noted faint rhythmic tapping, evenly spaced like footsteps. They submitted the tape as part of their folklore thesis, but the advisor dismissed it as interference from old equipment. During that same decade, the Kansas Historical Review republished an article on the Bloody Benders, noting the eerie regional parallels to other rural disappearances, including an unnamed homestead west of Sedan. The author avoided specifics, but locals recognized the description. He wrote, "Where isolation deepens, cruelty hides in plain sight, and when its memory fades, something else takes its place." That line would later appear on postcards sold in antique shops as if part of ghost tourism, but those who lived nearby didn't find it amusing. They said the land still shifted at night, that shadows lingered longer than they should. Even without a house to stand on it, the Warren place seemed to hold shape, an invisible structure that the wind still knew how to move through. The 1970s brought new visitors, paranormal investigators armed with tape recorders, cameras, and the certainty of uncovering proof. The Warren site was among the first they explored. In 1974, a group calling themselves the Plains Research Society spent 2 nights there. Their report, now partially archived, details temperature drops of 20 degrees in minutes and faint human voices caught on tape. 2 overlapping whispers repeating the same 4 words. "We never left here." Critics dismissed it as staged, yet the lead investigator, Miriam Cole, later confessed she destroyed the original recordings, claiming they did not sound like echoes but replies. Locals said she stopped traveling after that, living quietly until her death decades later. In 1977, construction began on a short stretch of power lines running across the property. The crew foreman, Arthur Dean, noted in his log that tools repeatedly went missing overnight. On the 3rd morning, the men found all their equipment stacked neatly beneath where the upper window would once have stood. No prints marked the ground. Dean ordered the project rerouted, even though it cost the company more than they could afford. "We don't dig there," he said. "It feels owned." By the decade's end, the Warren site had once again returned to silence. Farmers nearby reported that their cattle refused to graze close to the old boundary fence. Hunters swore they heard the sound of 2 people walking through the grass at dusk, slow, measured, never straying apart. The regional newspaper printed one last article in 1979 titled, "Ghosts of the Plains, the House That Waited." It revisited the Bloody Benders as historical precedent and mentioned the Warrens as an unsolved echo of Kansas's earliest dread. The author concluded that the real terror lay not in ghosts, but in memory, the kind that never decays, only repeats. Those who read it said, "The phrasing matched something found years earlier in Eliza Munro's Lost Field Journal, though no surviving copy has ever confirmed it." By the 1980s, the Warren legend had settled into the fabric of Kansas folklore, half believed, half dismissed. A county project to widen the old road ran directly through the former property line. When surveyors brought in machinery, they reported equipment malfunctions, engines that stalled without reason, compass needles spinning aimlessly. One operator claimed he saw a woman standing by the edge of the site, her dress pale and old-fashioned, her expression distant. Thinking she was a reenactor from the local heritage group, he called out. She did not answer. When he turned to get another worker's attention, she was gone. The man quit the next morning. The report he filed is still kept in the County Works Archive, stamped Anomalous Observation. Later that year, a journalist for a small magazine attempted to tie the case to other rural legends. His piece, The Dark Plains, traced the history of unexplained vanishings across Kansas, from the Bloody Benders in the 1870s to the Warren Homestead at the turn of the century. He suggested that isolation itself was the common thread, that in the silence of wide land, people sometimes fold inward, vanish, or become the thing they feared. The article drew modest attention before being pulled at the author's request. In a letter found years later, he wrote, "They came back in dreams, poor, tired, standing in the wind, watching the house that wasn't there." By the decade's end, no one lived within a mile of the old property. The land was fenced off, listed as unsuitable for development. Travelers on Highway 99 occasionally reported lights far across the field, where no structures stood. The county called them reflections from passing cars, but those who saw them insisted they stayed still, 2 steady glows, close together, like lanterns held side by side. When fog rolled through, it was said you could still make out a faint square-tum of darkness where the house once stood, and above it, where no walls remained, something like a window waited. By the 1990s, what little remained of the Warren property had blended completely with the prairie, yet the legend endured through late-night radio shows and roadside storytellers. In 1992, a filmmaker from Lawrence attempted a short documentary titled The House That Waited, combining oral histories with local folklore. His footage captured nothing unusual except a single frame, filmed during dusk, showing what appeared to be 2 people walking across the background field, one taller, one slighter. The crew swore no one else was present. The director abandoned the project after a fire destroyed his editing suite weeks later. The single surviving reel ended up in a collector's archive. It has never been released. In 1995, a pair of hikers exploring the area, after hearing the story from locals, found an iron key protruding from the ground. Nearby, a depression in the soil revealed the outline of a small foundation stone. One of the hikers, a history teacher, traced its shape, and realized it matched the blueprint of a farmhouse recorded in county records from 1898. When they returned the next day to take photographs, the stone was gone. The prints they had left in the dirt remained untouched. They reported faint noises that night at their motel, 2 taps on the window, evenly spaced, as if calling for attention. A few years later, the Kansas Historical Society included a short passage about the Warren homestead in its journal, comparing it to the Bloody Benders as a case of regional memory resisting erasure. The author wrote that every generation rediscovers the site only to lose it again, as if the land itself rejects closure. Even now, the coordinates listed in that article lead to an empty stretch of prairie where cell signals fade and compasses waver. Those who visit describe an oppressive stillness, a sense that something watches from just beyond the line of sight. The wine there seems to move differently, slower, deliberate, carrying faint echoes of a woman's voice asking softly, "Did you see them?" Into the 2000s and beyond, the Warren homestead existed only as a name passed between historians, paranormal researchers, and those who grew up near the edge of its fields. Satellite imagery shows nothing unusual, just grass, shadow, and the faint trace of an old access path, but those who stand there swear the air feels heavier. In 2004, a team of graduate students from a nearby university used ground-penetrating radar to map subsurface anomalies. They detected rectangular voids beneath the soil, perfectly aligned with where the cellar and upper room once stood. The data corrupted on export. A technician reported hearing muffled footsteps in the audio track of the recording, though no microphones had been active. The university never published the findings, marking them inconclusive. In 2011, a traveler passing through on a foggy evening pulled over to take a photograph of the open plain. Later, when reviewing the image, he noticed 2 faint human outlines in the distance. One male, one female, both standing close, facing the camera. The picture went viral briefly before being debunked as a camera glitch. Still, locals recognized the landscape immediately. They said the shapes matched old drawings of the Warrens. Not long after, trespassing signs appeared around the perimeter, yet each spring someone removes them, leaving the posts bare. In recent years, drone hobbyists attempting to film the area claim their batteries die suddenly above the coordinates. One pilot reported seeing a window where there shouldn't be one, a perfect black square suspended over the grass. When he blinked, it was gone. The county no longer marks the site on maps. Tourists who ask for directions are told politely to drive another route. Some nights, truckers still glimpse a faint yellow light across the field, steady and low, as if a lantern swings behind glass that hasn't existed for a cent. Turi. And so the story endures. The poor siblings, the house that waited, and the watcher above. Time erased the walls, but not the presence. Those who stand on that silent patch of Kansas soil say the wind there still bends oddly, as if brushing against something unseen. They say if you look too long toward the emptiness, you might catch your own reflection in an invisible pane, and behind it, a figure standing just beyond you, looking back.